Hey everybody, it's my 40-gallon Waterfall tank. It is Tuesday evening and we are going to take a trip around the world. It's about 8 o'clock. I just got in. I finally was able to get out on the reservoir today in my kayak and spend some time out there. So I've still got to get my truck unloaded. I got to get dinner and so on and so forth. So I thought I would pop in here. We could have a look around the fish room together. I've not been in here yet today except when I turned the lights on this morning, so who knows what we'll find. But we're going to start over here on my Waterfall tank so I can get these lights turned out after we're done looking at the tank. And then I won't have so much glare on the other tanks once we start going around the room. So not a lot to talk about. Really, there's not a lot to talk about in any of my tanks. I haven't been in here doing too much work this week. I did get a few things done, but not much, not a lot to talk about. So the only thing I can say about this little tank is that I still have not gotten in there and done anything with that filter or put any of that pre-filter sponge on there. It's still flowing, and as long as it's still flowing, that's all I'm worried about. The only reason I wanted to put the pre-filter on there was because the snails kept crawling all over the filter intake, or I should say the pump intake. It's got a little fountain pump in there. And the snails would clog it up, and it would reduce the flow to the point where, water would just be dripping out of it. Of course, when I had the pre-filter on there, the gunk would clog it up to where it was just dripping within a few days. So it actually clogged up faster with the pre-filter on it than it was with the snails on it. And lately, the snails haven't been clogging it up for some reason. I don't know why, but you can see the water is still flowing, vigorously enough that we've got that kind of surface action and bubbles and stuff. So I am not going to worry about it. The other thing I will say is you can see the big temple plant right there. That's the one that was in this tank. It was just kind of shoved in there off to the corner, and it was kind of getting on my nerves, so I pulled it out of there and threw it in that other tank, and now it's kind of getting on my nerves in that tank, so we're going to have to pull it out of there and do something else with it. So my actual 40-gallon tank here that's attached to my Waterfall is pretty much same old, not a lot going on in there. I do have a fair whack of the cyanobacteria has kind of surged back in this tank. I'd gotten on top of it for a while, but I have since sort of slacked off on how frequently I've been doing the water changes. This tank does not have a ton of circulation in it. It's got some, and now you can see over here with the water level being so low, with that water flooding in like that, that does generate a fair amount of circulation, but not throughout the whole tank. And it still leaves us with loads. You can see all that bright green. A lot of the stuff is on the front glass. It's kind of hard to see through. But if you see all that dark markings all over the rocks and everything, that dark is the dark green of the cyanobacteria. It only looks so bright green right here because it is sitting directly underneath of that spotlight shining down on it. This darker stuff over here is the same stuff. It's just not very well lit and it appears darker like that. So plant-wise, my Ludwigia up here is doing really well. You can see how it's actually starting to hang down and grow. It's growing up here. It's actually starting to clog up in here again. It must have broken loose now that it's... not sure what's going on with that. As of this morning, the water was dripping back into here, running across, and it was flowing down across there, and now it's not anymore. And I did not get in there and do anything to correct for that. So you can see how much cyanobacteria and stuff grows back there. There's a chunk sort of hanging off that piece of wood. And all of that bright green sort of slimy look is also cyanobacteria. It's part of a natural environment when you've just got water and nutrients and light and all that kind of stuff running all over everything. So we're down to the last few daylilies. I got one flower here. This one's already gone. Got one currently flowering and a little small handful left to bloom, and then we will be done. I thought about bringing another one in from outside. My ones outside in the yard haven't even sent up flower spikes yet, so I could bring more in and we could have a second, possibly even a third wave of flowers right down here in the basement. And as one of my viewers pointed out, I'm basically just asking for trouble and probably going to be bringing more bugs and so on and so forth in. So I'm kind of on the fence about that. That is a good point. I really, really do like seeing those daylily flowers like that, but I don't know if that's, don't know if I'm going to do that or not. So anyway, that's about all I can think of to talk about with the Waterfall. Not entirely, now that I think about it. I did cut this huge geranium. It was growing way over here out in front of everything, so I cut that way back, and now I've got 2 big cuttings upstairs that I'm going to make into brand new geraniums. So we're going to call that good. Turn out the big whammy doodle LED, turn out this spotlight LED, and then we will turn out this light for now anyway. And we can get on with actually having an around the world video. Wow, we're already 5.5 minutes in and we've barely gotten started. So this is my 29 miscellaneous. Nothing really to talk about in here. I did do a water change, I don't know, maybe 10 days ago. I'm not sure if it's been since the last time I did an around the world update on this tank. But nothing's really changed. This tank just ticks over like a clock. And I haven't had any issues with any fish. I haven't lost any fish. I haven't seen any sick fish. Nobody's having any problems eating or anything like that. The plant growth still looks good. You can see where I cut the anubias back. We've got some new leaves growing out of it. And I will also point out that if you'll notice in this tank, I do not have insane rapid plant growth like I have in so many of my other tanks. And that is because this tank only has the regular old stock hood with the little stock LEDs that came with it. This was a like a $99 Walmart starter special. Came with the LED lighted hood and a 29-gallon tank, and I think it had a in-tank filter that came with it and some fish food and, you know, the whole 9 yards when you get one of those starter kits. It came with all that stuff. So with that stock amount of lighting, I get normal amount of growth. This Java fern over here hasn't been trimmed back or cut in I don't know how long, and you can see it's still a reasonable sized plant. You can even see the rhizome and how the rhizome is attached and grown across the piece of rock right there. Looks fantastic. Get to some of my other tanks and it looks like a triffid in there trying to eat the tank, and I do believe that is because I have such intense lighting on so many of my other tanks. So there's my 29. Again, not much to talk about. My 55-gallon gourami tank. My regular viewers might notice it's a little more green, a little darker than usual in there. I took a giant wad of water Sprite out of my 125 that was just getting on my nerves. You couldn't even see into the 125 anymore. It was so dark. And I didn't know what to do with it, as usual, so I just flopped it into the gourami tank here. And so now you can't see into the gourami tank, and the gourami tank is really dark. But the gouramis will munch the heck out of that water Sprite. They've already been munching it up. The roots are getting all nipped down. Right now, in this tank, I am down to my moonlight gourami, who is hiding over there in the corner. You can just see her face sticking out, possibly his face sticking out. And then I got that little honey gourami up in the corner that you just saw swim by, that little orange job right there. And those are the only 2 gouramis I have left in my gourami tank at the moment. But I do believe my Siamese algae eaters also nibble on those roots. I'm not 100% on that, but it does look like at times they are in there nibbling on the roots. Now, they might be nibbling on algae that's near the roots or growing on the roots. I don't know, but it does look like they nibble on the really fine roots that hang down, and even some of the fine fronds that you get on that floating water Sprite like that. The gouramis definitely do, and we'll see how long it lasts before that's just so chewed up and beat up that it doesn't even want to stay alive anymore. Otherwise, I need to get the glass wiped down a little bit again. This is one of my tanks where I do have the problems with the cyanobacteria, and you can see that sort of reddish color. Most of that is actually on the front glass. As I move around, you can kind of get the feel for that. It is starting to come back on the wood a little bit, and some of the plumbing and the hardware up here has it on there so thick that it never really gets off of that, no matter how much treatment I put on the tank. So maybe one of these days we will try using the erythromycin, as I've recently discussed in a few videos, and we'll see if the erythromycin doesn't just wipe it out once and for good. So we'll see how that goes. Moving on to my 55-gallon tank. I'm going to say not much to talk about in this one either. I will point out that I'm noticing my anubias here is looking a little rough. It's still sending out flower shoots. I got one there. I got a flower spike right there. That one's actually sticking out of the water, it looks like. Yeah, that one's actually sticking up and out of the water. And I get new growth on it. You can see some nice bright green leaves in there. You can see my big old pleco in there. That's his tail hanging down. Big old string of poop hanging off of him. Thing is a pooping machine. So anyway, if you look at my Anubias, and you can see the new growth there, and so on and so forth, but it doesn't look very good. The roots actually look good, and all of the new root growth looks really good. But overall, the plants are just looking a little rough. Part of that has to do with that big pleco in there scraping the leaves. You can see all that dark material is probably the same red cyanobacteria that we just saw in my other tank, but it never really gets a chance to take a hold of anything because of the way the leaves get scraped, and the sort of depressions in little areas that can't get scraped are what get, that dark material gets left behind, and that's why they look spotty like that. That's not what the leaves are supposed to look like. All that dark material you see is stuff on the leaves, and the pleco scrapes them pretty well, but that scraping also injures the leaves, and so this, it's just not looking good overall. My water also has very, very little dissolved solids in it and very little in the way of nutrients. The Anubias will draw nutrients out of any wood it's attached to, and there is some wood in the tank. I just don't know if there's any on the roots. And then, of course, I do have a planted substrate, which supplies a little bit of food to the roots there, but not a whole lot. So I have actually dosed this tank with the Excel trace nutrients. I'll probably forget about that, and it'll be a one-shot deal or maybe a once-in-a-while thing every now and again, which is probably the best way of explaining why I don't really worry about doing it in the first place. Even if I decided I want to start dosing my tank, I'll forget when the last time I did it was, and then I won't remember. I was thinking about doing it yesterday. Did I do it? And then I'll be afraid I won't want to do it today, because if I just did it yesterday, I don't want to overdose. And at the end of the day, I just kind of forget about it altogether, and we don't worry about dosing my tanks with anything. And so that's why I don't do any foods or ferts or anything. But at the moment, we are going to see how a little bit of trace nutrients does for this. So moving on, my phone is telling me my battery's getting low and we still got a long way to go. My 40 breeder here, not anything really to talk about in this one. I did add an air stone. I did a pretty big water change, and I got my power head all cleaned off. It had roots and stuff growing all over it and everything. And so I've got the circulation up in this tank. I've got the gas exchange up to maximum potential with the air stone in there and everything, but other than that, I haven't done anything to this tank. You can see my dwarf pike cichlid right there, my Crenocicla regani. She's looking good, doing well. You can see one of my rubber lips right there, scraping the rocks, earning its keep. I got a couple more rubber lips in there. I don't see any of them at the moment. But otherwise, like I say, everybody's doing well enough in there. Probably need to get in there and do another water change, and at the very least get the glass wiped down. So moving on to my 125-gallon New World tank. I've got enough videos about this tank that I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. I know some of my viewers only watch these round the world updates, and this is the only update you're going to get of this video. But as I said, my battery's running really low, so I got to kind of pick up the pace here. Haven't done anything to this tank. I did top it off the other day. I don't usually do that with this tank. I top it off maybe once, and then when it starts getting low again, I just go ahead and do a water change. As I said in a recent video, when I top it off, I generally top it off by bringing the hose in and just turning the water on. So if I'm going to do that, I may as well drain some of it out first before I put more water back in. And therefore, I seldom actually just do a top off. I usually do at least a small water change while I'm in here adding water back to the tank. But the other day I was in a hurry, the water level was getting really low, and I just needed to get some water back in the tank, so I threw the hose in, did a quick top off, and that was all there was to it. So everybody in here is looking fantastic. My spotted tilapia there is getting a lot more outgoing. I see her on a regular basis now. I have gotten to like this fish enough that I've finally given it a name after all these years. I have very few fish that have names, but this is now one of them, and her name is Flo. So that's partially because I got her from Florida, and partially named after Flo from the Progressive Insurance TV commercials, and there's reasons for that. My wife dressed as Flo for Halloween one year, and it was a big hit. Everybody thought she looked just like her, etc., and we've always kind of got a kick out of that. So I thought Flo would be an appropriate name for a fish that came from Florida. Anyway, so there you go. That's the official first unveiling of the new name of my 5-year-old or 4-year-old fish, however long I've had her. But she is officially now Flo. So there you go. We're going to move on from my New World tank, and we are going to have a quick look at my Gudgeon tank. And we actually get to see my Gudgeon out for a moment. Don't get to see him very often. So this tank's kind of a mess. I did some work recently where I got in there and I trimmed my temple plant down. It was looking like a Christmas tree. So when I trimmed it, I just took all the cut plants and I stuck them in the tank. And so some of it died and a bunch of the leaves died off. And so I've been fishing dead leaves out of there, but I've got all kind of new plants that have roots and stuff developing and growing on them, but they've now turned upwards and are growing this way. So I really need to get some temple plant pulled out of this tank. I think I'm going to take some of it and actually plant it outside in the garden and see what that looks like as an outdoor plant and see how big it actually gets. It's called swampweed, is one of its common names, and I do believe it gets up to like 10 or 12 feet tall, and it gets pretty flowers all over it, so that should be interesting to see if we do that. So it's a shame my Gudgeon's out here on the side of the tank where we can actually see him, because I really don't have time to sit here and keep chatting. At some point this video is probably going to end, so if it does end abruptly and unceremoniously, remember my battery is running very low, and that is probably going to be why that happens. So there's a look at my snakeskin gourami I got in this tank and did a big water change the other day. I got the glass wiped down. I removed a bunch of the red tiger lotus right there that was blocking light from the surface, and it opened up this end of the tank so much more, and we now get to see my snakeskin gourami a lot more because that fish tends to hang out down at this end of the tank. So moving back here to where we can get a little bit better of a view. There's my tenopoma hiding down there where he normally hides. I'll step back and get a look at the whole tank. So I really need to get in there and thin out the Java fern. As I mentioned already, I did get in there and thinned out the floating water sprite that was on the left, and that was blocking all the light, and now you can see in there quite clearly. I shot a video the other day of my big, beautiful angelfish right there, and of course, it's always worth noting my gorgeous rainbow fish. So somebody asked me the other day how I still liked my Millennium rainbows. I've never been a big fan of albinos, but these are indeed albino Millennium rainbow fish, and I still am absolutely in love with them. I fell in love with them when I saw them in the store, and I still am every bit as in love with them now. The only thing, you know, I got 4 females and 3 males. I wish the ratio was the other way around, but that was all they had. They did their best, but that was all they had, and so I got stuck with the 4 females and the 3 males. But you can see how fantastically bright orange those males are. I can't wait till they fully mature and get into actual spawning colors. Well, they're albinos, so I don't really know what that's going to look like. I'm really kind of curious to see whether that orange coloration will get even more vibrant, or will they stay the same due to their lack of pigmentation. I don't know. It'll be interesting. And then, of course, these rainbow fish here are my last 2 remaining Marcy rainbow fish. I'm sorry, 3 remaining Marcy rainbow fish. I've had them for quite a while. But those are Marcy rainbow fish. They are a hybrid. My clown loaches are doing okay, although I don't see them at the moment. And my rainbow shark is doing okay, but I do not see him at the moment either, but they are all in there. There's one of my loaches. There's my big one. So moving on, before we run out of battery here, we've got my 20-gallon angelfish tank. I'm pretty much done with the chemi-clean treatment. I just haven't gotten around to pulling the air stone out and doing that final water change and calling it good. I've actually been kind of fascinated by watching this little piece of water sprite tumble over and over in the corner. Because it's been rolling so steadily and so evenly, it looks like it's growing in all directions. It's got roots growing out everywhere. It's got fronds growing in every direction. And so that's been pretty interesting to watch. I've been kind of waiting to see how big that actually gets and if it's going to grow into like a ball of water Sprite if I leave it in that corner and leave it to keep tumbling. So basically I just need to pull that air stone out of there. I can do a water change if I want. I don't really have to. It's not a big deal, but you can see we did get the bulk of that cyanobacteria out of the tank. The tank looks nice and good again, and in 6 months or 9 months or whatever it's going to be, we will be back in here, I promise you, and we'll be looking at cyanobacteria again, because it always comes back in this tank like it does in a few of my others. I've mentioned this before. I've got a few tanks where it just comes back. So, as I said, maybe we'll try the erythromycin and see if that doesn't actually wipe it out for good. If we do, we're probably going to start with this tank as my experimental tank, because it's small enough that I'll be able to keep a very close eye on it and we won't have to worry too much about it. And if the erythromycin does well in this tank, then we can start using it in my other tanks, and then maybe that'll be the end of my cyanobacteria woes, but I doubt it, so we'll see. Moving on to my Brackish tank. Let me turn the forward light on here. I'll keep a light fixture on the front. I only use this when I'm shooting video. So I just did about 7-gallon water change the other day, but I replaced the water I removed from the tank with fresh water. So the salinity was already below officially being brackish, even though I still call this my brackish tank. The salinity started at 1.003. which is below brackish by anybody's standards. And after the water change, I measured again, and we are down to 1.001. I also meant to get back in after the water change and remove all that gunk and cyanobacteria that's hanging off the back glass, but I forgot completely about it. I went upstairs and started getting the videos uploaded and all that, and it completely slipped my mind until just this moment. But as I said, I'm just getting in here for the first time today, so we're all having a look at these tanks together at the same time right now. So not a lot to talk about in this tank. Everybody's gone except for Butterbean. He's the only fish left in this tank. The weird white marks and lesions and stuff are still there, but they are less and less noticeable. I'm going to see if, now that we've reduced the salinity even further and we're down to barely even getting into, you know, any kind of water hardness in there, I'm going to see if it doesn't have an impact on him and see if he doesn't color up, or maybe some of those white lesions and marks will go away. I don't know. We'll have to wait and find out, but there you go. So, before my battery dies, I will be able to say goodbye officially, now that we've made it all the way back to where we started, more or less, my 29-gallon miscellaneous. So, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget, this is my Around the World playlist, and don't forget, this is my 29 miscellaneous tank. Thanks again. I'll see you real soon in the next one.